So Lisa and I have been collaborating on books, as you heard. We've written 4 now, and courses, talks. We've been doing this for about 20 years together. It seems like a very long time. But the focus has always been on testing and quality. I'm Janet.
I'm Lisa.
So you'll know Lisa from the pictures with donkeys, right? 3 donkeys?
4 donkeys.
4 donkeys, that's right, 4, sorry. She's from Vermont in the US, and I'm from Western Canada. I don't have donkeys, but I really like fantasy books, especially those ones with friendly dragons. Yeah, none of the Game of Thrones dragons. And we will take questions if we have time at the end.
Yes, thanks for remembering to say that.
There's some of the things that we've been thinking about lately is the relationship between development, which includes testing always, and the product quality. There is a difference, but there is a definite relationship between the two. So we're going to start out by talking a little bit about quality and what that means, and then we're going to talk about testing from a holistic point of view to show how testing supports that quality conversation. And then we'll end up with some next steps that might help you if you're struggling. We also thought we should talk a little bit about weaving, since the title says weaving quality in. But we're not experts on that at all. We do know that a good weave has to be checked on a regular basis. It has to make sure it has enough weft and weft? Gotta check my notes. Yes, and that's called bubbling, which is kind of a cool name, I like it. But like software development, it takes a lot of practice, and you're constantly trying to improve. Although weaving is usually not a team sport, like software development.
It can be. There are collaborative.
There are collaborative things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about quality, and quality is a really hard conversation to have, and it's really hard to describe. So some of you may have seen this before, because I've used it quite often. But I want you to think about which cup of coffee is best for you. How many think number 1?
Oh.
All right. Number 2? A few less. What about number 3? Yeah. So as you can see, it's mostly split between 1 and 2. Some people like, or 1 and 3. Some people like number 2. Number 2 happens to be my sister's favorite one. I want you to think about why you chose that. Is it because you're envisioning your own cup of coffee from your coffee maker, just nice and black? Or are you thinking about that coffee shop that you can go sit in and get that really nice, pretty design on it? What made you choose that? If I give you a different dimension and add price to it, does that change anything? Does anybody change their mind because of the price? A few people, yeah, because you start to think about value. Am I willing to pay that much money for that pretty little design on top? Maybe not. So quality becomes something very subjective to the person. Now, when you were choosing, did you think about the process at all? How was the coffee made? Some of you will be thinking about fair trade coffee because that's what you're going to buy. But did you think about the coffee beans? When they were planted? When were they picked? How were they roasted? How much training did that barista have to put that pretty design on top? That's the process. And we have to talk about quality from a process perspective too, because you won't get that quality cup of coffee if you don't have process quality as well. So if we take it back to software or to products, I don't even like to say software anymore because everything we do is a product now. It's not only the software. How do you measure it? These examples up here, I think only one actually measures maybe the process, which would be the code coverage. That's a process measurement. The rest might start to talk about quality from a product perspective, but not even. And so a lot of times we measure things thinking it's product quality, but it's actually measuring the process. How do we build it? Product quality should answer, have we met the customer's needs? Have we solved their problem? The delivery team, and when I talk about delivery team, I mean a cross-functional team that includes who's ever on it. It might have testers, it might not. It might have business analysts, it might not, right? Pretty much always has programmers, but yeah. But if you know your quality goal, like what is the goal that you're seeking, then you can start to take ownership, the team can. But their goals need to be based on the organizational goals. How does the organizational consider quality? And that's a big assumption, because I find that most organizations don't even talk about quality. And the team is left on their own to try to figure out what that really means. We need to be able to take that responsibility, be able to listen to the customer and their feedback, and constantly improve. Now, what we're going to do is introduce the holistic testing model, which we think is, just really good. But testing isn't quality. It supports the quality conversation. And we think that the model helps teams weave quality in from the very, very beginning. If we think about testing all the way through, and our definition of testing isn't testing software. It's testing lots of different things, like ideas, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's all about fast feedback. Can we get that fast feedback? Because it's integral to what we do so that we can adapt and improve. So when we looked at that typical DevOps, and I'm not showing the picture, of the typical DevOps loop, it always has testing as a separate phase, and that bothers me a lot. Yeah, exactly. Dan Ashby had his continuous testing loop, which said we test here, here, and here, and I liked that a lot. But he put a lot of emphasis on the building, the merging and code. So come up with this model instead, which speaks to us more. We can use it to talk about testing. So you start with usually the discovery. What are we trying to build? Hopefully the business has a good idea that it makes sense. We plan, we go around the loop, we understand in more detail, we build it, that's where the magic happens. We deploy it to some environment, we eventually release it to the customers, and hopefully we can observe what they're doing and learn. So that's the loop that we're using for our holistic testing model, which is this. Same loop, just a lot of examples of the types of testing you can do. So there's a lot of different kinds of testing. So in the discovery, for example, that's where the business decides, does this have return on investment? Does it make sense? We plan at a high level. We start thinking about risks. We'll break it down into stories, testable stories. Right? That's where testers can really help using their critical thinking skills. We understand, we go into more detail. We ask more questions till we know what we need to build. And then we go in and we build it. We code it, we test it, we automate it, not necessarily in that order. Right. We deploy to a test environment, maybe to a development environment. We do some more testing, usually on quality attributes, maybe the infrastructure. We release to the customers. And we might do some testing in production using something like feature flags. And we go around and we observe. Hopefully we've put in lots of instrumentation or telemetry into the code. And then we learn. And this is a nice simple model, we think, to be able to do your testing strategy to help support that quality. So the left side is really about testing early. Are we going to build the right thing? The right side is about, did we build it the right thing? Observing, learning. Left side's about preventing defects in code. Right side is about finding them and fixing them. But if you look at it from a holistic perspective, you can see what you could plan and your strategy. So we're going to take a little ride, a little journey around that holistic loop. I was in Scotland earlier, and I actually got to see the train go over the viaduct. That was quite exciting for me. I did not take it. I could not get the picture from that angle, though, so I was down low. So this one was better. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail on each of the stages, and we're going to use a simulated case study to kind of show what we mean by this. Lisa, all yours.
All right. So our case study, we wanted something that we could think about. How would we do this application using a holistic approach? And so we looked at the Agile on the Beach website, and it has this create your own adventure. And I was really disappointed when I clicked it and it just had the schedule. I was really expecting something more. And so we thought, well, let's take this. You know, it really would be cool to have an application where you can pick sessions off of the schedule and make your own schedule and maybe put it on your phone and maybe share it with other people. So there's a lot of, maybe have it give you notifications. So lots that could be done there. So we're going to go into depth on 3 of those stages in the model, which is planning, deploying, and observing. And then the other stages, we will talk about them a little bit, just to give you an idea. So the first stage is discovering. It's the first testing that we do. So the business stakeholders bring their new feature ideas, and hopefully we have a diverse group of people to give their different perspectives and talk about it. And is this going to solve a customer problem? Is it valuable to the customer? Does it fit with the company's vision? Does the company have a vision? And a lot of times you get in these meetings and you have lots of different stakeholders and they all have a different priority. And so this is a good time to sort of settle those things out. And on the teams I've been on, it works really well. You have the product owner, product manager, other business stakeholders, a designer, a tester, a programmer or two, maybe even an operations person, customer support. All these people who will understand different ways that this new feature might impact customers and impact the business and impact our application. So these are really, really effective discussions. And it helps the business refine their ideas. And then we're getting into what are we actually going to deliver. So we have a big feature idea. It might be an epic in your project tracking tool. And we want to start brainstorming about, how big is this feature? Janet and I really like using mind maps. There are a lot of other great visual tools that you can use for this. It helps us think outside the box, get us out of our rut, and surface those hidden assumptions, the things that business people assumed you would know to do, but they didn't tell you. So that we try to get those, and many of those, we try to avoid having those unknowns. And then once we know what's needed, we can start talking about risks. We're real big fans of risk storming. I don't know if everybody's familiar here with risk storming, but riskstorming.org, I think you can look, or riskstormingonline.org, you can look it up. And then a big challenge for a lot of teams is slicing that feature into stories that are small, consistently sized, testable, operational, all the good things. That's a big challenge. And there are, again, you could do story mapping from Jeff Patton. There are a lot of techniques you could do for that. We like using just a simple flow diagram. And for an application like this, that's what we would go with. The important thing for us is use a visual model, guide the conversation, keep it focused. Nobody wants to spend all their time in meetings. So make these good working sessions with everybody collaborating, everybody thinking their most creative ideas. So let's look at our case study. We're going to plan our own adventure. All right, so we're going to create a mind map. So Janet, I think the middle would be create your own adventure, huh?
Create adventure. My adventure.
And we already have the schedule, so that's done.
Right.
And so are we going to do a mobile app for this or web browser? What are we going to do?
I don't know. Let's stay away from details, implementation
Okay.
details right now.
Okay.
I think if we assume that we're going to use just the web for
Okay.
now, I think that'll be about the
good.
best thing to do. So what kind of things do we need? What do we want to do? You had said before that you wanted to be able to select a session, right?
Yeah, add a session to my personal schedule. And to do that, I probably need to log in, have an account. Oh, I should be drawing too.
You should be drawing too. One of the things to know when you're doing anything like this is everybody needs a marker in their hand so that they can participate. If only one person is doing it, it loses its value.
Yeah.
All right, so we have create account, login, add a session. I guess we want to be able to delete in case we change our
Yeah,
mind.
might change your mind. And, maybe we would even want to be able to add multiple sessions because we're not sure yet and we want to prioritize them. So,
Okay. These three things probably come into like managing too.
yeah.
What about things about like adding session notes?
Oh,
That would be cool.
that would be really nice. And something I mentioned earlier, I'd love to get notifications. Hey, your session's about to start because we're told we don't want to be late. So that would be a really nice thing to have.
So I think this is good enough for now.
Yeah.
It gives you the idea. One of the things that a mind map does at this early stage is it allows you to test. We can start testing people's understanding, what the product owner was thinking, but also the kinds of things we might be able to do.
Well, and also my experience is that teams always think something will be real simple, and as soon as you mind map it, you realize, oh my gosh, that's
Yes.
huge. And there might be risks that we want to put on there as well. Oh, you've got the clue. I'm so
Okay.
used to using it.
It's yours.
All right. So we know you can't see this, so this is something we might have done here. And we want to make our assumptions visible and see how big our feature is. And then we want to decide what do we want to put out for our first learning release to get feedback from some real users. Now, some people might call that a minimum viable product, but we like learning release because it's really focused on, are we going in the right direction? Are we solving our customers' problems? Do they find this valuable? And we realize that this is an awful lot, so we've indicated which things are nice to haves that we might do in the future once we find out if this is working well for people. So we don't want to do everything at once. It's really important to work in these thin end-to-end slices because we want to be able to test it, show it to people, and get the feedback.
Right.
And then the next thing we would do is slice the feature into stories. And for this example, we're using a flow diagram. Again, lots of different techniques to slice stories out there. So this could be our first try, having a diagram. And once we did this, we were like, you have to save it every time you do anything. We might want to revisit that. But for now, this is what we've got. So our first story would be display it and save it. Just display the schedule and click the save button to get out of there. Just very simple, but it's something we can show to our product owner. We can write tests for it. We can automate. We can show it to people. And the second time, we want to add a session. That's the most sort of critical feature of it. So can we add a session? Hooray. And again, we can test it. We can show it to people. And then the third one, maybe we're going to delete or remove a
Remove is
session.
probably a better word than delete.
What's that?
Remove is probably a better word than delete.
Yeah, I think that's a better word. And so this is how we would approach slicing things. And again, it might make us think, well, deleting and adding, that's really updating. Maybe we want to change our approach. So, but it's the magic when you actually draw these things out and talk about it. So we showed a couple of activities that we like to do during planning, mind mapping, and using a flow diagram to slice stories. And it gives the teams a chance to test their ideas and assumptions. And it's also really important to identify risks using something like Brainstorming or just old-fashioned risk assessment, probability and impact. And then once we've sliced our feature into stories, Now we can start diving down into more details and understanding really deeply at the story level across the whole team. So, Janet, how do we get to that really key shared understanding?
Yeah, well, we've been testing all the way along, and those flowchart scenarios will become tests along the way, each of the complexity. So in understand, we're seeking to understand. This is where practices like acceptance test-driven development, behavioral-driven development, BDD, come in really handy to help us really understand what are we building. We're trying to figure out the behaviors that we want. Those become our tests, and we can automate them if we choose to. We can also use tools like techniques like example mapping. I love example mapping by Matt Wynn. And it helps us flesh out extra business rules that we hadn't thought about before. So we're going deeper and trying to figure out more about what the story is. It's also important at this stage is to think about the instrumentation, that telemetry that we want to put in. And if we're not thinking about that early, well, then you have to kind of go back and figure out what you want to do. So you need to be thinking about that. So bringing in people like site reliability engineers, SREs, to help us with that sort of thing, to think about it. Again, these are examples. There's not room to put all the kinds of testing activities that can happen. Things like thinking about the data would be part of this. Where are we going to get the data? So we call this testing early, because this is testing our understanding before we ever write a line of code. When we give tests to the programmers before they start coding, the code is way better. We find way fewer defects. And that's the goal, is to prevent defects in code. So we're moving along our journey. We're going to now build. That's the magic, right? This is where the teams usually concentrate their efforts. They think about the coding and the testing, doing test-driven development, TDD, other automation stuff, and I'm not going to talk about the rest of the automation because that's a whole nother talk. But doing activities like static code analysis before you check in. Is my code good? Doing things like, some people call them desk checks. I like to say show me, because to me, when a developer says, Janet, can I show you what I did? Yes, please do. And I sit beside that developer and I ask questions. QA stands for question asker, by the way. And I like to ask questions because anytime we find a bug during that show me, we can pair, we can fix and test that bug immediately. That's fast feedback. And it might be before a programmer ever checks in his code or her code. That's what we're aiming for, fast feedback. If the story has a little bit of more complexity, once it's deployed to the test environment, or maybe I even take it onto my own environment, I want to explore a little bit, right? I'm looking for unknowns. What didn't we think about? Because in the understanding, that's all the things we thought about. But we know we don't catch everything. So it's pretty important to do that human-centric testing as well. All right. But that's the part that you folks all know best, right? Let's move on to deploy. The right side of that loop. Now, the code has been written. It's been deployed to an environment of some kind, dev, test. We separated out deploy because this is where a strong deployment pipeline, a strong workflow shows its strength. Can we depend on it? Are our test environments stable? Can we spin up, take down, do what we need to do? Now, much of it is automated, but human-centric activities, testing activities, are really important as well. And it will depend on your context. Some might not have any, but most teams I've worked with have them, right? So it's also sometimes the first opportunity that you get to start testing some of the quality attributes. We talked about the risks earlier. Quality attributes, you might call them non-functional requirements, right? Quality attributes, those usually address the risks. There is a really strong relationship between the two. And this might be the first time we actually get to test some of that things like load performance, recovery, way too many to mention. Now, we like to start by drawing visibility. We'll talk about visibility a lot, and I've heard that in other talks too. Draw out your deployment workflow. You might not call it a pipeline quite yet because you don't have too much automation. That's okay. It's a workflow. Draw it out. Make it visible. Show what is automated. Show what is being done by a person. When you make it visible, you find out who understands what, because guaranteed that not everybody has the same understanding the first time you draw it. But it helps you to think about what bottlenecks you have. Maybe we have too many human interventions, waits, gates, right? It can help you think about what to automate next or what to fix. If our CI isn't working as well as it should, maybe we would go right back and fix that before we do anything else. It is important to know the path that it takes, because when you're planning your testing strategy, you have to know what is being tested. You have to be able to explain that. You have to know what is happening. And the visibility really, truly is critical to make sure that everybody has that shared understanding. A tool we like to use for understanding some of those test suites. So a test suite would be something that runs all together at the same time. We use the test suite Canvas by our good friend Ashley Hunsberger. You look at that test suite and you think about these different pieces. So things like the dependencies, constraints, your pipeline, the data. How does the team respond to failures? Maintainability of that test suite. How do you do that? And last but not least, is it an effective test suite? Does it do what you think it is doing?
Can we trust it?
Can we trust it? Exactly. And there's questions to help trigger thoughts. So we're going to walk through and an example for our adventure case. So we chose security. So our adventure, we want to test our security. So first of all, the why, right? It's because our business questions, our personal data, we think is the most important thing that we have to protect.
Absolutely. People have to be able to trust that they can enter their data.
Yeah. What about dependencies?
Well, we've looked into testing, security testing tools, and we decided to use the OWASP ZAP API level test tool.
Have you used that before? Because I've never used it before.
I have not, but we have other people on our team who have.
Excellent, okay.
And we need some UI level workflow tests in order to use that.
Okay, that's good to know. What about constraints?
Yeah, we've had problems with flaky UI level tests. Anybody had that problem before? And we've really got to fix that, or the security testing is just not going to happen. So we're a little nervous about that.
So we have to have a plan to fix some of those flaky tests. Get rid of them, maybe? Yeah, possibly.
Maybe just delete them, yes.
All right, the pipeline and execution, right? We want to run it with ideally with every deployment. Do you think that is necessary?
Well, we'll have to see how long things take to run. There may be things that we put on a different schedule.
So we're going to plan on running it with every deployment that we have to test. Good, all right. And the data, that's always a big one of the hardest things.
Yeah, we want to use production-like data, and so we want to refresh it every time we run in the suite of tests. And so to speed things up, we want to just create an S3 image and be able to.
So what's an S3 image?
So that's a container in Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Hold the data.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Now, who's going to respond to those tests, to the failures? Because I'm sure we'll have failures.
That's the biggest question that people don't think about. Like, their pipeline fails and nobody really notices. They just go on with their work and wondering why nothing's deployed into test or production. So yeah, we want to decide on that first. And in our case, we decided we're going to have a person every day.
A point person.
Yes.
Yeah. Doesn't mean they're going to fix it, but they'll identify.
They'll be responsible for making sure it gets fixed.
Yeah. And of course, we come back to the maintainability, which is those flaky tests. Before we can have our security tests, we need to make sure those flaky tests have been fixed. Mm-hmm. And the effectiveness, how are we going to do that?
Yeah, so we're also going to run quarterly penetration tests. And if those find issues, then we're going to have to revisit our daily security testing because it may not be good enough. So something to watch out for.
So mostly a tool like this helps the team think about their test suites. And you wouldn't start off by doing every one, but choose one, fix it, think about what it's doing, and really understand what it's covering. So if we have our deployment pipeline and all our automated tests run and everything's passing green, we're good. Except maybe we want to have some of those human-centric tests. And we've chosen to have accessibility testing and exploratory testing on top. We want people to actually look at it and look for those unknowns. So everything's good, and we can release to production. So Lisa, let's talk a little bit more about releasing to the customers.
All right. So to start with a little terminology, and this can trip people up still that we can deploy to production without releasing it to our customers. So deploy does not equal release. And there are a lot of different ways we can do that. And that has really opened up so many more possibilities for mitigating risks and doing testing that prevents really bad problems or finding the really bad problems. So we could choose to only release to internal users, maybe to selected beta customers, or just a percentage of customers. There are just a lot of strategies to do this. And the important thing is getting the whole team involved and talking about which strategy works best for your context. Because there's a lot of choices out there. And what's going to make sure that we deliver good quality for our customers. And this is a place where testers really can help the team identify risks and think of ways to mitigate those risks with a good release strategy. And where appropriate, if you don't have regulatory constraints, perhaps you can safely do some testing in production, which is, our test environments never look like production, so it's nice if we can do a little testing in production as well. And we also want to be able to respond quickly to production problems. That's really, some risks, some unknowns are going to happen, and we need to respond to them fast. So we don't have time to explain all these release strategies in detail, but these are some common ones. And they let us finish that human-centric testing, like the exploratory testing and accessibility testing we talked about, and still be able to do continuous delivery, continuous deployment. And they also let us test safely in production, so by controlling who can access the new changes, and then really being able to quickly turn those changes off if there's problems occurring. And and if we see problems at any point, we can just turn the flags off, we can roll back, or we could get a hotfix out there. So a lot of choices, but we need to talk about it in advance. So with our Create Your Own Adventure and our learning release, our thin slice end-to-end, we're going to find out if our workflow makes sense to our users. And also we can monitor to see if we're meeting our service level objectives for things like load time and performance and things. So what's that going to look like for our customers? So getting back to our case study. So these are just the first changes, and we're going to release them to our speakers. They're going to be our beta users. Our conference speakers will be our beta users. And here's what they might see. They can pick some sessions. If they didn't pick a session for a time slot, it's empty. Pretty simple. Put their name up there or whatever. And again, this is something you can get feedback on. You can show it to people. You can test it. So our features are in production just for our speakers. And this is where the observe phase comes in, where that telemetry that we built into our code in the planning stages, we decided what events, what traces, what data to capture in our log files, so that we can spot problems and see how the customers really use our product, because it might be something we didn't expect. And can we detect errors before the customers feel the pain and fix them fast or turn the new changes off? And can we diagnose it without having to add telemetry to our code and redeploy? Who's ever had to do that? Oh, we got to add more logging and deploy to production again. That's painful.
Yeah, and I'm just observing this picture. Obviously, we didn't get our standards quite right, because there's one person up there that his knees are showing.
Oh, no. Go back and address that. So back in the planning stages, again, we decided the data to capture. And so when we see unexpected errors, we don't have a dashboard for it. We don't have an alert for it because we didn't expect it to happen. We didn't know. We still need to be able to ask questions of our production system and get answers. And that's observability. And fortunately, with things like OpenTelemetry and all the great observability tools that support them, like Honeycomb and Lightstep, there are a whole bunch now, that will let us investigate quickly so we can see exactly what the user did and where the problem occurred. So it's so important to be able to do this because, yeah, we're never going to get everything right. We can't test everything. We can't monitor everything. We have to be able to have another plan, a backup plan. So again, our features have been being used by our speakers, and they gave us feedback. They would rather have a different landing page, and they want to tweak the workflow. So this is going to help us hypothesize our changes that we're going to do next. So we're learning from what we saw in production, and we're going to decide what to do next. So so we're going to create stories from those hypotheses. So here's the stories we might create. The page load time is a problem we definitely want to address at some point, but we're not concerned about that right now. We're still working on the design and the workflow, so we're going to do that other change first. And that might end up being multiple stories, right? It might be too big to be one story, but that's where we'll decide in the planning stages of how to slice that up and how to address it. So well, it's going pretty good, Janet. We got some feedback. It more or less works. And we think we got a pretty good process going. We feel like we're going to achieve our quality goals, but we could always improve. So it'd be nice to know how we're doing with our quality process. So Janet, how could we do that?
Yeah, we'll be ready to implement this next year, right? So that's really it. It's a nice, simple model. I want you to just take a few seconds to think about your team. How do you think about testing? Do you think about it from a holistic point of view? Or is it all part of the build stage and you test after? All right, so we've got that, and as Lisa says, what's next? So one of the things I've been working on is a quality practices assessment model. I call it QPAM. And with Selena DeLisi, I have to tell her.
Janet finally wrote a book with somebody else.
And but if you look at your quality practices, and that's really what you want to do, is determine where we are. I was listening to a talk yesterday, and that's what they did is, where are we? Where do we start? And by doing an assessment, that gives you a baseline, and you can then decide what to improve or not. And so this model that we have is there's 4 dimensions and 10 quality aspects. These are the 10 quality aspects. The first 3, culture, or feedback loops, culture, and learning and improvement, are all social aspects. And I find that when I go into teams and they don't have a decent culture to be able to learn, if their feedback loops are long, if they don't know how to improve and learn, any of the other things is really hard to do well in. 4 and 5, the deployment or development approach and the quality and test ownership, are really a combination of social and technical aspects. You may have, chosen the development approaches if you're doing Kanban or Scrum or extreme programming, whatever you've chosen, your own kind of framework. That's what it's about. And then the last 5, testing breadth, code quality, and technical debt, test automation, deployment pipeline, and defect management are all technical kinds of aspects. Now, these are in the order of importance. Defect management is at the bottom. We thought we had to put it in. I would rather not, but it needs to be talked about, right? So with each of these quality aspects, there are different practices within that we consider. For example, feedback loops. We think about within the team, like that show me, it's a really fast feedback loop. From the team to leadership, from the team to the customers, stakeholders. What do those feedback loops look like? So within each quality aspect, there's multiple kinds of practices that we call. The 4 dimensions are beginning. So beginning is wherever you're kind of starting and asking for help. Usually it's people going, I don't know what we're doing, but it feels wrong. It might feel like chaos. So we just called it beginning. Unifying is when teams have adopted whatever methodology they want to use, Kanban or Scrum or XP. And they're starting to use those practices. They're starting to have their daily stand-ups. They're starting to do their planning meetings. They're starting to do all of those sorts of things. But they really don't understand why they're doing it yet. They're just learning. The practicing is where teams, they're doing pretty good. They're delivering to their customers regularly, whatever regularly and frequently means to them. It might mean quarterly, it might mean weekly, it might mean daily, it might mean whatever. But they're doing it on a regular basis. And then innovating is those really high-performing teams. They're just on top of it. They understand their customers. They know what their customers are like. They're out there talking to them. They're constantly looking for places to improve. Not all teams want to be there or will get there, right? And I need to call attention that this is not a maturity model. The goal is not to get to innovating. It's to look at where you are and what can you improve, what practices can get you better results. When you're conducting an assessment, whether you're doing internal, like just for your team, right? There's lots of different ways to gather information. I like to do a process retrospective. It gives me an overview of what the team is doing and what their process is. But I also need to do interviews with individuals, maybe with groups of people, observing and looking at some of the artifacts. When I'm observing, quite often I see people say one thing but do something else. And so it's important to kind of call that out and look at it. But the goal is to listen to understand. It's not about giving advice or anything else. It's where are you at the team. And so when you're evaluating, it's really about pattern matching. Our model has, this is what I would expect in each of these dimensions for each of these practices. So it's just kind of pattern matching, looking at, what do they do, what do they say, where does it fit. But it helps teams to identify. Now, once they know where they're at, then they can choose what to do. So these are the 10 quality aspects, and the very middle, that dot, kind of is where the beginning is. So that inside circle is beginning, and if you were doing a radar chart in Excel, it would have numbers and look a little different than this. But I can tell at a glance that this team is doing pretty good, practicing most of the way around. But they're learning and improvement. They're really good at that. They're innovating. They're really trying to keep up, and that's good. Their defect management, it's not doing so well. It's,
Maybe they don't have very many defects, they don't need to manage them.
No, I never thought about that. I was thinking that I might want to dig in a little bit more and find out why they are. But yeah, maybe they don't have any. Or maybe they've chosen that it's not important for them. Their customers don't care about the defects so much. Who knows why? But it can be that way. So you have to understand. But once you know where you are, when you go back to your quality goals, you want to look at those quality aspects, decide which are important, where you are, and really think about the practices and choose one or two, never more, right? And try to improve them. Figure out what you want to do. Design an experiment. Start with a hypothesis. We believe that if we do this, and how to measure it so that you know you're improving, right? But do it step by step and think about it. Some you'll have more control over than others. All right, let's wind this up. What time is it? We got no time.
It's 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock, perfect. Let's wrap it up, Lisa.
All right. So we hope that you'll take some ideas away and try them with your team, experiment. And by the way, there's more information about the QPAM model. There's some brochures over there and some really cute stickers. Help yourselves. I think it's the first step to take, and the teams I've been on that did not ever have this conversation never became high-performing teams, and the ones who did have the conversation did. What is your quality goal? What does quality mean to you, to your team, to your company, to your business, to your customers? And what level of quality do you want? And what can you commit to? Because it's going to be hard to achieve, so you need to have a strong commitment. So I'll give an example from a team I was on 20 years ago. We decided our quality goal was to write the best code we could write that we would be so proud of. We'd take it home and show our moms and put it on our refrigerators. And how do we get that level of code correctness? Well, extreme programming practices have already been shown to deliver this. Back in 2003. So let's learn the extreme programming practices. That was hard. It took us a long time to master test-driven development, for example. Get used to pair programming. Continuous integration was pretty easy. So there was a long journey, and if we hadn't made that strong commitment as a team, we had just thrown our hands up. We fortunately had a business leadership that was supportive of, yes, we hired you to write software, so do it the best way you can, and not interfered with us and gave us the time to do that. But it's really important to have that conversation. Then we really think that the holistic testing approach is one way to help you achieve those quality goals. And then keep track, measure, get data on where your process quality is right now, how you're working, especially those human-oriented ones. So we have some resources. Is there something else you want to say?
No. I was just going to say, these are a bunch of the resources. Do we have it down here? On the agiletestingfellow.com.
Oh, yeah, the free mini book. Yes.
We have a mini book on holistic testing you can download. Feel free to do that.
And unlike our first two books, it's not 550 pages, it's 37 pages.
And that's why we called it a mini book.
These are just some other things we talked about. And if you're not, I know a lot of you are really strong on the delivery and DevOps terminology, but if you're not, one book I highly recommend is DevOps for Dummies. There are other good ones too.
And this is our contact information. On any of those websites, you can contact us.
We love talking about testing, so all our contact information is on our websites, and get in touch. And let us know if you tried anything and how it worked.
Yeah. And I think we have time for questions.
Yay.
We do have time for questions. Anyone up first? Yeah. I'll come up around. I'm on it. Would you mind passing it over if that's okay? Just over.
Oh my goodness. This is awesome.
Hi, thank you. Excellent talk. We enjoyed it. I wanted to just ask, what impact would you say microservices and distributed systems have had on testing and quality?
So did you hear that?
Yeah, what impact do microservices and distributed systems have? And that's a great question. We didn't really talk about it. And I personally have not worked actively worked on a microservices application. But people who have tell me that it really changes the conversation a lot. It really puts more focus on observability because your system's so complex. And with microservices, test automation, automating at the UI level might be difficult because you're changing these services all the time, and the idea is you want to deploy that service as soon as it's changed. So people who are experts have told me it's more dependent on having the right telemetry and having the right information to understand what's happening in production and respond quickly to it.
And have a lot of contract tests.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah, definitely. We have. Oh, I didn't mention we have a YouTube channel where we have 15-minute video chats, and one of them was with I can't think of his name. Anyway, an expert on microservices testing, and he talked about doing contract testing as a good way to help that. Thanks for remembering that.
And that's called Donkeys and Dragons.
Our Donkeys and Dragons video chat, but look for the Agile Testing Fellow channel.
Right,
But our chat's called Donkeys and Dragons. So it's us.
Yeah.
Anyone else? On the way.
Getting your
Keeping you
exercise.
busy.
Big room,
Yeah.
isn't it? I'm on it.
I think that's the first time I heard a question that you didn't hear.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, thanks very much. You mentioned or suggested giving tests to developers before they even start coding. Could you give an example of using the hypothetical app, what sort of thing that might be?
So if I got a story, and let's take a simple login story, right? And so we're talking about it. We will talk about acceptance tests at the high level, acceptance criteria, if you call it that. But you won't have a lot of details. So I'll go back to my desk if I'm the tester on that story, and I'll think about a lot of different things. So I'll just create a bunch of variations. So I would take that list to the programmer, and I'd say, so I'm going to test for leading and trailing blanks. I'm going to test for the special characters. I'm going to test for this, 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 and this. And hopefully that programmer says to me, oh, Janet, you don't need to test for all of those things because I'm doing them in my unit tests, right? But if I give my test to the programmer first, there's no reason to get silly errors because they already know. It just makes their code so much better.
Yeah, I put a caveat in there, though, of if you're working on a really complex application with a lot of business rules and logic, start with just basic happy path tests. My team members have had to say, Lisa, let's just make sure it works at all, okay? So start with a happy path and then start building in those more complex scenarios.
Yeah.
But it's got to be a collaborative, tiny iterations as you're working on a story.
Yeah, and if the stories are small enough, you won't necessarily have all that complexity in one story.
Okay, another one?
Somebody in that corner up there? No. There's nobody over there.
That's all right.
It would be fun. No, just kidding.
Give me an exercise, yeah, it'll work out. Okie dokie. Can we have a huge round of applause for Lisa and Janet?